Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here, and it's Barbie analysis time. I watched Barbie a second time and I took lots of notes. I really do believe it's one of the most thought-provoking and interesting movies this year. I think Barbie has a lot to say about our tumultuous and ever-evolving relationship with gender roles, both in our personal lives and as a society. Greta Gerwig's film supposes that gender roles are something we invent to help us validate ourselves and understand our worth in a confusing world. It shows both how we can become empowered by imagining ourselves in these roles, and how expectations to fill these roles can hold us back. And it even offers a vision for how we can venture beyond them. The beginning of the movie sets the stage by detailing Barbie's introduction to and impact on the real world. With Barbie, instead of just modeling themselves after mothers, which is what baby dolls encourage, girls can now aspire towards a role model or an idol. One that is beautiful, accomplished, has her own money, her own job, her own car. Of course, a lot of this movie is examining the ways in which Barbie created harmful beauty standards and encouraged rampant consumerism, but it does offer a voice to those who Barbie maybe once was empowering for. Barbie's real-life creator, Ruth Handler, is a character in the movie, and one important thing that she said towards the end is that nobody looks like Barbie. Like, she understands that Barbie is an unattainable beauty standard. She didn't design Barbie to look exactly like girls. But for her generation in 1959, having an unattainable standard to aspire towards was powerful and important. Barbie was an idea of what women could be, in a world where women weren't presented with as many models for what they could be. The film is about our relationship with idols and symbols, particularly gendered symbols. Gerwig's film suggests that having models to aspire towards makes it easier for us to understand who we are. And it supposes that patriarchy is just another idea that humans invented for that purpose of affirming who we are as individuals and as a society. Obviously with an imbalance that assigns men more inherent worth than women. Barbie Land is just the opposite, of course, where things are always great for women and they seem to have this self-sustaining self-worth, and the men affirm who they are through, as Ken says, the warmth of the Barbie's gazes. And in Barbie Land, the women think everything is great because it's going great for them, and the men think everything's great because they don't see another world. Conflict arises in Barbie Land when the membrane that separates Barbie Land and the human world erodes, since the woman who is playing with stereotypical Barbie starts projecting her sadness onto Barbie, and then Barbie becomes sad in a way that Barbies are not supposed to be. And I think there's something interesting to be said about this rule, that the human and the doll must be kept separate at all times. The doll is supposed to be something to aspire to. It's not supposed to represent the uglier aspects or the weirder aspects of yourself, or just the more emotional aspects of yourself. Much of the Barbie movie is about our self-concepts and how seeing ourselves in idols can help us form a self-concept, but it also shows how fragile a lot of our self-concepts are. An example of that is how Ken considers himself a beach expert, despite that really meaning nothing, and stereotypical Barbie's worth comes from how stereotypical she is. Meanwhile, Alan doesn't have a self-concept at all because he doesn't know what he's supposed to be. Having a strong self-concept gives us comfort and security, as artificial as it may be. But as Barbie tells Ken at the end of the film, maybe the things you thought made you you aren't really you. As Barbie becomes disillusioned to her world, Ken becomes enchanted with a new fantasy of living in a patriarchy. Watching how Ken liberates himself from the matriarchy in many ways mirrors how women in the 60s awoke to their potential, by seeing himself in powerful masculine role models and seeing masculinity represented as something powerful. Ken sees presidents on money and carved into mountains, and athletes empowering each other. Symbols associated with masculinity like beer and big trucks are glorified in our culture. So much in the same way that a little girl could look at a Barbie and say, wow, this could be me, she's so powerful and pretty and cool, Ken thinks, I didn't even know I could be this. This is just so empowering for me. So for all its critique on gender roles and how restrictive they can be, I think it's interesting that Barbie actually seems to acknowledge something intrinsic and powerful about our gender identities, where we can almost intuitively recognize that certain symbols are masculine or feminine and say, that's me, that's who I am. While Ken may feel empowered by the patriarchy, at the same time it's very clear that Ken's conception of the patriarchy is silly because he thinks it's all about horses and mini fridges. The movie is satirizing how we cling to arbitrary symbols to affirm our self-concept. And in general, I think the movie does a really fun job pointing out how silly our world looks in the way that masculinity and femininity seem to bleed into so many aspects of our everyday life. Like, what exactly is masculine about trucks or horses or beer or golf or playing the guitar? Maybe it's all a result of marketing. And I think Barbie does a good job pointing that out too. But in any case, I don't think Gerwig resents the Kens for their masculinity, or the Barbies for their femininity. Barbie's just critical of instances when these ideas of masculinity and femininity are enforced in ways that inhibit or neglect our humanity. Gerwig believes that, like any symbol, masculinity can be a force for good or evil, and that symbols should evolve when they aren't working for everybody. And while the movie has plenty of fun poking at toxic masculinity, the movie's also a clear critique of like girl boss feminism. Gerwig's actually much more sympathetic towards Ken than I think anybody expected. During Ken's low point at the end of the movie, he feels that if he isn't appreciated by women for his outdated version of masculinity, he will have nothing. And I think that's a very real observation of how some men feel today. As the type of masculinity these men are clinging to is being reshaped, they feel that they no longer have a leg to stand on. And nobody asked Greta Gerwig to show sympathy towards those kind of men in this movie, but she believes that the message of Barbie applies to them too. And in many ways, the character Barbie is going through the same thing, where she's been uprooted from the world that once gave her comfort, so now she has sympathy for Ken's plight. I think at this point in the film, Barbie and Ken are both in the position that we are in our world, disillusioned to the rigid gender roles that once brought us comfort and security. But Barbie believes that her and Ken need to discover who they are as individuals, outside of their gendered roles, outside of each other's gazes, and how Barbie decides to do this is to become human. But what does being human mean? Being human means changing and evolving. One of the key characteristics of Barbie Land is that nothing changes and everything's the same and it's always happy and you'll never die and every day is the best day ever. Being human means embracing evolution, dealing with tumultuous emotions, and just being uncomfortable and uncertain about who you are. The appeal of Barbie Land is really the certainty, and maybe when we use dolls and idols to understand who we are, that's just a way of us tricking ourselves into thinking that we have certainty. Being human is a never-ending search for purpose and meaning. And this is where Barbie arrives at something I think is really profound. Barbie says, I want to be part of the people that make meaning, not the thing that's made. I want to do the imagining. I don't want to be the idea. Because if we're not forming our concept of who we are off of ideas and models, then we have to create who we are. To be more human is to be more creative. And when we look at Weird Barbie, she is more creative than the other Barbies. Every time she whips out like a map or something, everyone's like, whoa, and she's like, yeah, thanks, I made this. Not fitting the mold, being an outsider, sometimes forces people to be creative. Ruth tells Barbie at the end, I can't let you choose to be human without showing you what it means. And then she tells her to close her eyes and feel. Like, that is what it means to be human, is just closing your eyes and feeling what it's like to be in your body. Trying to understand the mystery of who you are, with no real answer coming back to you. The Billie Eilish lyrics that play over this moment are really important. The lines, I don't know how to feel, but I want to try. I don't know how to feel, but someday I might. That someday I might line is the idea that being a human means constantly searching for yourself with the hope that you'll find who you are, and the hope that you'll figure it out, and the acknowledgement that you might never. And you might just always be on this search. And in the same way, trying to figure out how to navigate the world within your gender or within what the world projects onto you is a strange and ever-evolving journey. Barbie's emotional core really comes from defining itself as a coming-of-age story and a mother-daughter story. Gerwig said in an interview that she feels the experience of being a woman is that at a young age, girls feel like they can move through the world freely and without inhibition. But as they grow older, that freedom is slowly eroded and they begin to shrink themselves. They see the way that women are expected to be in the world, the impossible standards that they have to live up to, basically what America Ferrera is talking about in her monologue, and coming to the conclusion that they're not good enough, which is exactly the journey that Barbie goes on. And she overcomes this by realizing that what is uncomfortable about existing is actually what she should embrace. And when Greta Gerwig says that Barbie is a mother-daughter story, she's not just talking about Gloria and Sasha, but Barbie and Ruth. After all, Ruth named Barbie after her daughter. As is common in a Gerwig film, by the end, the daughter has a newfound appreciation for what her mother has given her and the world that she's created for her, but knows that she has outgrown that. And in what might be the line of the movie, in my opinion, is when Ruth tells Barbie, we mothers stand still so our daughters can look back to see how far they've come. It's this acknowledgement that those after us will have evolving views of the world. And even the change that you and your generation makes to make the world a better place for women will someday be outdated. And it's this acceptance of that. This conversation between Ruth and Barbie at the end is so many things at once. It's sort of this coming of age moment with a mother and a daughter. It's a meta conversation between what Barbie used to represent to the world and what Barbie is now going to represent with this movie, reinventing Barbie's image, and a conversation between generations. Almost like second wave feminism having a conversation with modern day feminism. We couldn't have gotten to this point without the kind of feminism that Barbie maybe represented at one point. The fact that we've moved on from Barbie is really a testament to the progress we've made. The conversation's also this acceptance of how the world's constantly shifting and how we are constantly shifting as people, as opposed to, the stagnation that Barbie Land represents. And it mirrors another conversation that we're having today, because in response to a lot of these changing ideas about what gender means and what role it should be playing in our world and in our lives, we have a backlash of people who want to enforce stable and consistent and knowable gender roles on the world, who think that the world is better off when we know our place. They are seeking that stagnation and that certainty that is appealing to the Barbies in Barbie Land, and Barbie shows why we should be suspicious of striving for stagnation and certainty. Change is seen as beautiful in Barbie, exemplified by that moment where Barbie calls the old woman beautiful. Her wrinkles are a physical mark of change. So Barbie doesn't pretend that we know where we're going, and it doesn't pretend that it's going to be comforting to try to move forward into territories where we rely less on symbols and models to understand who we are. But it does offer us a slogan for how we can move forward. As sort of cliche and silly as it is, we are enough. If we separate our self-concepts completely from the archetypes and models that we worship, who are we? If I am not what a man is, or if I am not what a woman is, if I'm not beautiful, if I'm not my job, what am I? And the answer is that without these things, we are just kind of weird and confusing and emotional, but maybe we can find comfort in that universal discomfort of being human. We're all influenced by symbols and ideas and idols that make us who we are, and our lives will always be a balancing act of choosing which symbols to embrace and reject. The film believes in the power of identifying with a gendered experience, exemplified no better than the moment where America Ferrera's monologue gives all the Barbies the willpower to fight back. But simultaneously, Barbie dreams of and believes in a world where we can be less reliant on symbols, where we can lead the way with our own creativity, our own ability to craft more authentic versions of ourselves, and to be the ones that can create new ideas for others to aspire to in the future, even if someday we may outgrow those too. So that is why I think that Barbie is the greatest piece of mainstream pop culture entertainment of the year, and why I think it's a deep movie. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. What's your self-concept?